You are not looking at yourself in the mirror. Your brain is making a decision about who you are becoming. And most people have no idea that this decision is being made every single day in silence, without permission. It happens in ordinary moments when nothing feels significant. Yet something fundamental is being updated beneath awareness. The reflection is only visual, but the interpretation is structural. The brain is not seeing appearance alone. It is extracting patterns, comparing repetition, and building a model of identity from what it repeatedly observes. Identity does not change in dramatic moments. It changes in accumulation. Small decisions that feel insignificant are stored as repeated evidence. Standards that are lowered slightly do not disappear from the system. They are recorded. The brain does not evaluate these moments emotionally at first. It processes them as behavioral data, and over time, that data becomes the foundation of self-definition. Psychologists describe part of this through self-perception theory introduced by Daryl Bem. The principle is that individuals often infer who they are by observing what they repeatedly do. The brain does not prioritize intention when constructing identity. It prioritizes repetition. What is repeated becomes what is considered true, not because it is spoken, but because it is demonstrated. Neuroscience expands this through predictive coding, where the brain functions as a continuous prediction system rather than a passive receiver of reality. It builds internal models of the world and constantly updates those models using incoming information. Importantly, this model includes the self. The brain is always estimating what kind of person you are based on behavioral consistency, and it adjusts that estimate whenever new repetition confirms or contradicts previous patterns. At this level, identity becomes less about belief and more about accumulated evidence. Every repeated action strengthens a particular model of self. Every repeated absence of action weakens another. Over time, the brain stops distinguishing between intention and pattern. It only recognizes frequency. A person may decide to wake up early tomorrow and genuinely mean it. But if tomorrow becomes next week and next week becomes next month, the brain does not record the intention. It records the pattern. Eventually, the identity model shifts, not toward the person they plan to be, but toward the person repeatedly demonstrated through behavior. There is a moment most people do not notice when this system begins to define them instead of being defined by them. It is not a sudden collapse. It is a gradual acceptance of repetition without correction. A postponed responsibility becomes normal. A broken promise becomes explainable. A lowered standard becomes tolerable. None of these moments feel significant individually, but together they establish the direction of identity. Most people do not realize they are changing while they are changing. The strange part is that the brain often treats consistency as more trustworthy than accuracy. A repeated behavior can begin to feel true simply because it is familiar. Even when a person consciously knows a pattern is harmful, repetition gives it psychological weight. Familiarity starts to resemble identity. Most people do not notice this transition while it is happening. They notice only after the accumulation becomes visible. A habit that once felt temporary begins to feel permanent. A description that once felt inaccurate begins to feel natural. By the time identity appears to have changed, the adjustment has often been occurring for much longer than anyone realized. What makes this process powerful is that repetition without correction becomes internal permission. When a behavior is repeated and not challenged, the brain interprets it as acceptable within the identity system. Over time, acceptance replaces resistance. What was once temporary becomes structurally integrated. Appearance becomes part of this system because it is continuous feedback. Every moment of self-observation adds another data point. The brain registers order, neglect, effort, or absence of effort, and uses these signals to refine its internal model of identity. Consider someone who promises to organize their environment but repeatedly walks past the same disorder every day. The room eventually becomes ordinary. Yet each observation quietly reinforces a message. Not about the room itself, but about what is considered acceptable. The brain absorbs that standard and updates its expectations accordingly. Confidence is often misunderstood as a starting condition, when in reality, it is frequently an outcome of accumulated behavioral evidence. When individuals repeatedly act in ways that align with consistency and responsibility, the brain begins to build trust in those patterns. That trust eventually manifests as confidence. It is not created through belief alone, but through repetition that removes uncertainty about the self. This is why waiting to feel confident before acting rarely works. The brain is usually waiting for evidence before granting confidence. Many people believe confidence creates action, when in practice, action often creates the evidence that confidence is built from. Change feels uncomfortable because it introduces conflict between new behavior and an existing identity model. The brain resists this conflict not because change is harmful, but because inconsistency creates instability in prediction. Identity is a predictive structure, and when behavior changes, the system must reorganize its expectations about the self. That reorganization is experienced as discomfort. At the core of this entire system is a principle most people never consciously recognize. The brain does not become what you decide once. It becomes what you repeat without interruption. Carl Jung suggested that what is ignored does not disappear, but continues to operate beneath awareness, shaping behavior indirectly until it becomes visible in life patterns. The same principle applies to discipline, habits, and standards. Nothing is erased through neglect. Everything is stored through repetition. Avoided behaviors leave traces in the identity system, just as repeated behaviors do. What a person consistently postpones can become as psychologically significant as what they consistently pursue. The brain learns from absence as effectively as it learns from action. There is a point in this process where awareness becomes unavoidable. A person realizes they are not who they intended to be, not because of a single failure, but because of a sequence of accepted compromises. This realization does not come as shock alone. It comes as recognition that the system has been running continuously in the background. The psychological twist is that most people assume they are actively choosing who they become, when in reality, they are often only choosing whether to interrupt what is already being formed. Identity is not primarily created through intention. It is created through permission, granted by repetition. The moment of self-recognition is often subtle. It is not always dramatic or emotional. It is a quiet understanding that the current version of the self is not separate from past behavior, but the direct result of it. The mirror does not show who a person is in theory. It shows what has been repeatedly reinforced until it became stable enough to appear as identity. The uncomfortable reality is that identity does not require permission to change. It changes automatically. The process continues, whether it is observed or ignored. Every day contributes something to the model. Every repetition casts another vote. Every action contributes to this outcome, and every omission contributes equally. The process of becoming is continuous rather than momentary. Identity is shaped not by isolated decisions, but by the total accumulation of behavior over time. What a person becomes is determined by what they repeatedly allow, reinforce, and normalize within their daily patterns. Eventually, this accumulation becomes visible, not as surprise, but as recognition. And one day, the only thing left to realize is that you were not becoming that person in a single moment. You were becoming it continuously, in every moment that seemed too small to matter.